Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
So I've got Natalie Earle here with me, who is a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. And I think, as with all people in this space, well, not all people, but most people in this space, they all have an epic story, personal story to why they involved in this community and doing something within the community. So welcome, Natalie. And then I think, let's start off by hearing your story.
Thank you so much, Doug. Yes, I would like to tell my story in the way that I often hear my clients tell their stories, or from now that I'm a practitioner, when I look back at my how I grew up, what I was eating as a child, some of the things that I dealt with as a kid, it's all crystal clear why I had the symptoms that I started to develop later on in life. So, as a young child, I was bit by a tick in the Midwest of the United States. And so it's very common to have Lyme disease and co-infections from these tick, bites and things like that. I never really thought about this ever. But around that time, also, I was dealing with a lot of stress in my upbringing. So I'm a survivor of childhood abuse. And so during that time, I had a lot of um, anxiety, a lot of turmoil, inner turmoil, conflict, and things resolved fairly quickly in my childhood, which was, getting me to a safe place, which was great. But the aftermath of that, where I had a lot of chronic stress, and there's a well-known in research now, there's a disconnection of the HPA axis that can ensue from early childhood stress like that. So I always thought that a lot of my symptoms, I had dry skin as a kid, I had yeast infections as a kid, I had chronic headaches as a kid. I thought all of that was because of just trauma. And a lot of it was contributed to by trauma, but I also have since learned that that you can be more susceptible to infections from getting a tick bite, or maybe some other people might resonate too from like mosquito bites too, and things like that. Or but that was just kind of the start of things. And I always thought that I was just a pretty resilient kid into my teenage years. When I started to get my cycle, I had debilitating pain in my hormonal cycle. And I was kind of the first in my family to experience this. I would always ask my mother, like, what, did you have pain like this? I would be ghost white, in pain, almost passing out from cramping during my menses. And that ensued for into my 20s. And even after still trying to do healthful things for my, like changing my diet a little bit, cutting out sugar, I went vegetarian for a little while and vegan for a little while. I found out about food sensitivities at that time. But that was probably the biggest um, chronic painful experience. And I never got diagnosed with endometriosis or PCOS, but I'm pretty sure I had PCOS or some form of this. I always was very skeptical of doctors. I think my mother, I think I got into this career and interest in nutrition and natural holistic health practices because of her. She was always learning about homeopathic remedies, and she was subscribed to like organic food, but we still ate a lot growing up of we're Italian family. We had a lot of pasta. We had uh, a lot of just 2% milk. We had the crock of and I can't believe it's not butter, kind of country crock, polyunsaturated seed oil butters in our growing up on that. And I was a sugar addict for sure. So in college is when my health kind of hit rock bottom. I got a vaccine for the HPV vaccine before I went to college. And then later that year, I had three very back-to-back chronic or back-to-back bronchitis infections I had to go on 3 rounds of antibiotics. I had a huge flare of cystic acne after that, and my mental health started to crumble even more. Again, I still always just kept going back to this is just stress. Like I'm just fragile. I'm damaged goods or something like that. But luckily, I was able to get connected with a naturopath who kind of got me introduced to the fact that there's this thing called leaky gut, and that was kind of the first introduction to where I've since learned more about the gut and psychology and physiological connections of like what the food we're eating, how it's being digested, um, and and how that can create inflammation and disease and symptoms in our bodies. So I I found out about these food sensitivities, but I wish my story ended there. But unfortunately, I thought that I needed to just take out these foods that I was sensitive to, and then that would be it. But uh, as many people who have done this before, you start taking out one food sensitivity, and then you get more and more sensitivities if you're not eating the foods that are actually going to heal your intestinal cells and reverse the imbalance of the gut bacteria in your gastrointestinal system. And so I wasn't focusing on what to eat. Instead, I was focusing on what not to eat, which was just those food sensitivities. So I still had blood sugar dysregulation. I was eating high carb. I was addicted to sugar still. But I was intolerant to gluten, dairy, and eggs. And I was vegetarian at the time, so it basically made me vegan. So my symptoms deteriorated or continued to increase, and my body was really deteriorating. And then I found a nutritionist who, at that time, I got exposed to Weston A. Price and the GAPS protocol, the Gut and Psychology and Physiology Syndrome Protocol by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. And it was like my story, my whole lived experience was in this book. And it was finally this uh, explanation that was a physical explanation to the mental health challenges that I was having. And it gave me something tangible that I could hold on to and actually take actionable steps towards that I could see then improvements in my mental health and then my physical health. So that was just kind of the start of my healing journey with my gut. Um, again, this is a long story because I found out things along the way, like many people do, like more puzzle pieces to my story. It was later that I had, connected the tick bite and my immune system dysfunction. It was later that I also connected, I had a mercury filling, and my mother had mercury fillings. And so that made me more prone to yeast overgrowth. So even after, some good significant healing on going low carbohydrate, the GAPS protocol is basically very low carb. And then also I did ketogenic and I love ketogenic even to this day. So I'm still very ketogenic. But that was kind of the beginning. I would still, walking myself into low carb. I was still eating some foods that were kicking up a lot of yeast overgrowth for me. So I'd get itchy rashes, ringworm rashes, things like that, spots on my eye, flaky skin, a lot of irritated skin. And the key was for me, because I had done previously, I had tried an anti-candida diet in the past. This was before my GAPS experience and low carb experience. And it was, it actually really triggered a lot of mental irritability and instability. So I don't love the anti-candida diet because it tells you to avoid all other yeasts in your diet. But the way yeasts work is that we need a lot of competition of yeast, of beneficial yeast, to crowd out the overgrowth yeast. And so, luckily, through the GAPS approach, you introduce lots of fermented foods, and the beneficial fermented milk kefir was so powerful for me to get after the chronic yeast issues for me. And then I got my heavy metal mercury filling removed and started doing some gentle chelation supports. And that was a long process. I would say a couple of years of getting rid of these toxins that I believe really are the at the root of all disease, and why we get nutrient deficiencies, and why we might need to really dial down our diet even more, not to mention just all of the industrial toxins from toxic food that we're eating today. So that whole journey inspired me. Like, I don't have, thanks to the ketogenic diet, low carb, and gut healing, I can now have an abundance of dairy in my diet. I can have eggs. I eat, occasionally, I have traveled and eaten sourdough bread, which is, fully fermenting the gluten out. But I don't like to do that still because I just ancestrally my research has shown that we as humans have evolved eating this way, um, eating low carb, and that seems to be the best I feel is when I'm doing that and continuing to do that. But thanks to just a series of the strategy of healing the gut and eating low carb and getting rid of toxins in my life and in my body, I've been able to not have these debilitating cramps that I literally would be crawling on the ground trying to get to Advil if I didn't get ahead of it. It was so debilitating and almost embarrassing, especially when it was first happening in college. I was dating my now husband, and he was always very concerned. But now I have now there's no issues at all, and um, no pain, and then not to mention the mental clarity, the anxiety that's calmed, my neurotransmitters in my brain. If there is residual trauma that I've dealt with PTSD, I feel like I have so much more resiliency today and I'm so grateful for this journey to be able to have really given myself hope in with regards to the trauma, but also just so many afflictions that we have in our modern day. And I get to share that with other people now, which is wonderful.
That's amazing. You talked about, or you mentioned a lot about gut health, and I think we spoke about it before we got started here. I've had very few, if any, even actual talks on gut health. Maybe one with Mary, but so we decided that we're going to do, because you deal with people and help them with their gut health issues within your practice now, right? So
Yes.
um, I wanted to focus the rest of this discussion, today
Mhm.
on gut health. So what affects it? What can people do to help to fix it? Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
what can people do to make sure they don't have gut issues? All of those different
Yes.
scenarios.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that was just like my healing story, which kind of overlaps with my as a practitioner when I first started studying to become a functional nutrition therapy practitioner. I started working at a functional medicine clinic, and we were using diets like AIP diet, mostly low carb, paleo, but and there are people dealing, there's the low FODMAP diet. There's so many different diets out there, right? And I was trying to figure out, why do some diets work for one person and not the other? Why did the GAPS diet work well for me, but some other people it might not have felt as good for them. And that actually led me to do some mentorship. I did 2 years of mentorship and worked alongside Mary Ruddick, who I think was on your podcast in the past. And what her research now too, and a lot of her experience too in clinical practice, I think as a practitioner, it's so important for us to continue our education. And so I really look to her to help guide us in like the understandings of our ancestral traditions. And what's really interesting is that with our our gut microbiome understandings of what nutrients are really good for it, in our modern day with modern science, it's a little skewed with the things that we're being told that we need a lot more fiber or we need diversity of plant foods and we need a lot of polyphenols. Certain things might be true in different contexts, but the context is everything. And these studies that are on like the Human Microbiome Project are on the Western microbiome, which is influenced by a lot of rhetoric of what's healthy, like healthy user bias, basically. And so when I was really excited to learn from her the interesting facts about plant toxins. And these are the biggest components that impact our gut and our gut microbiome are the plant toxins. So there's also in general stress. And so if one person has ever had a antibiotic or just a single antibiotic course of antibiotic, you are wiping out a huge amount of the beneficial bacteria. And this ecosystem of bacteria in our gut is really like the Amazon rainforest, right? So it's this complex ecosystem. We have dangerous species, we have is beneficial though, to be honest. But there's really like highlighted species that we love, like the amazing trees or certain animals. But then we have these dangerous insects, and we're like, what do those have to do with, why are they there? And can't we do without these bullet ants or whatnot? But in the microbiome, that's the same concept. There are certain bacteria that, like E. coli, might seem very dangerous, or some people can get very sick from certain types of E. coli, but there are other strains of E. coli that are very beneficial for us. And so the balance is key. We have to have enough of the good bacteria to keep in check these more pathogenic or opportunistic bacteria. And what people don't really realize is that when we're eating our food, our bodies are breaking those down into smaller pieces. There's that mechanical digestive process that happens. But we are actually more dependent on the bacteria in our gut to take those breakdowns even a step further for us to absorb the nutrients from the food we eat. So I like to tell my clients we need to focus on feeding our gut bugs and not necessarily our cells. Yes, we will. There's a symbiotic relationship though with when we feed our good gut bugs, we'll also feed our cells, and the nutrients we need we will get. So if we have a lot of illness, we have nutrient deficiencies, it's this constant cycle that repeats itself, where if we get antibiotics and we're eating processed high carbohydrate foods where the demand of B vitamins and magnesium and vitamin C is all very high, we use up those nutrients and then we get more and more depleted over time. And that actually continues to deplete the strength and health of our microbiome and the health of our intestinal cells. So why we're so dependent on these bacteria is because these bacteria, they release beneficial nutrients, right? The vitamins and minerals, but they also have byproducts that nourish the intestinal cells, the lining of our gut. And if we don't have a healthy, balanced ecosystem of bacteria, we will get toxicity instead, and that damages the intestinal cells, causes leaky gut, and causes systemic systemic inflammation all over. And that's where we need to address what do these bacteria really like to eat? What's the best food source for the healthy gut bacteria? And even now, like if you go and research, like most of the studies will show you that they want prebiotics, they want plant foods, they want carbohydrates. While that is true in vitro in a petri dish, the way that those carbohydrates are digested, if we're eating lots and lots of plant matter, they are not making it to the colon, the large intestine, because the small intestine is very long and we have some bacteria there, but that's our system is built very differently than other animals that require or that end up eating a lot of plant matter, right? They actually have like a lot more fermentation going on. And so, what's happening then to so many people now who are trying to listen to the research from in vitro dish, these bacteria like plant foods. So, we try to force a lot of plant foods and fiber and things like that. But then they start feeling bloated. And then you start getting gas. And then you're starting to get small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Upper fermenting gut is also what it's called. But this contributes actually to leaky gut. Where we want those plant foods and those fibers to get to is when they're fully broken down all the way to the colon, but we don't need that much. And actually, there's better studies that show that the protein that we eat and the fat that we eat will make it to the colon and feed good bacteria. So that's what we want to focus on to help with nourishing the gut microbiome in the colon and starve out those overgrowths in the small intestine. So that's why we like low carb is just so beneficial. And that's a little bit about why, um, about the gut microbiome. But what we don't realize is that, yeah, we are more bacteria than we are human, and that we really need to prioritize that.
So, you talked about, um, well, you mentioned probiotics and prebiotics, and then also feeding those bacteria.
Mhm.
What do you advocate mainly? Is like just to eat the right stuff, or in bad cases do you not normally go with pre and probiotics, but in
Mhm.
big, difficult cases you do. What is your real protocol on all of that?
Yeah, there was some really good research that I saw that showed that people who take a probiotic pill are more likely to have some worse health outcomes, actually, which I thought that
Mhm.
was interesting. It could be just a correlation that, you're unhealthy and so you're trying to get better, so you take a probiotic. But is it really helping? And what I find is most probiotic pills on the market are so small in dosage. If you take 1 milliliter of milk kefir, you get the same amount of bacteria that you would from one pill of a probiotic. So 1 milliliter is the same. You would probably, if you're making milk kefir, you could be drinking a cup per day. If you work your way up to it, because here's the thing is yes, when we have a desert landscape in our gut bacteria, when we start taking in any kind of probiotic or prebiotic, or a food that is a probiotic or prebiotic, you're going to have some reactions. And sometimes we like to call it a healing reaction because it's actually these foods are cultural foods. Fermented foods are cultural foods and they are meant to be in a human diet every day. So that's one of the four. I always say, like, the best way to heal your leaky gut, or if you are wanting to prevent the leaky gut, you're wanting to focus on four cornerstone foods. And that is soft cooked foods in the form of like meat stock soup, the animal proteins, that's the collagen, gelatinous joints and meats that are close to the bone. You make that into a soup with some non-starchy vegetables. You also want to have fermented foods in the diet, and then also organ meats, because those are our nature's superfood
Yeah,
and
totally.
multivitamin, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so there is a strategy though. So if you just are focusing on these foods, um, the meat stock, uh, organ meats, non-starchy vegetables, and non-starchy means like low carb, right? Because the longer the starch is, that's the more carbohydrates you get. And the fermented foods, if you're focusing on those foods, that will keep out a lot of other foods that are going to be harmful, or like toxins in the foods that we can eat, that are going to be more damaging to the gut lining. But sometimes you have to take it a step further if you're really trying to heal and not just prevent. I have people be very strict with doing a soup diet. The soup diet is a 30-day soup challenge where you eat nothing but soup it's meat, vegetables, and meat stock. And then we're adding in fermented foods. So we're really like everything you're eating is just these four cornerstone foods. And the way you cook it in like that soup form is the magic. I've seen people eat the exact same foods, but just change the way they cook it and make it a soup. And you get rapid healing, rapid regeneration of the intestinal lining. It just is a less stress on the intestines and the gut digestion to be able to now put that energy towards regenerating other parts of your body, getting rid of inflammation, fighting off an infection, right? So if we alleviate the stress by kind of pre-digesting some of our food with fermentation and cooking in soup form, then that makes it more optimal to help with the prevention and healing process for your gut.
Yeah, that's amazing. I don't know, since you worked with Mary Raddick before, um, we had a guy, maybe even at the same event where she came to speak, and I forget his name. I'm so sorry, but he's got a business called Captain Soup.
Oh,
He
yes.
was an Apache helicopter pilot,
Yes.
and eating the military food and everything like that, he started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and but at one point he started developing vertigo.
Yeah.
And as a helicopter pilot, that's kind of bad.
Yeah.
So he um, he basically had to ground himself,
Mm.
and then he discovered this whole thing about low carb and soups, and he started to make his own soups, and then that's all he ate, and he actually reversed his weight came back normalized, his
Mhm.
vertigo went away, and he was able to requalify and get back flying again.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I've done a podcast with him as well. Um, but he then started to produce a lot of cans and he started canning them. And he was lucky because he was an officer and a pilot, but he was able to literally take his own food with him on deployment. So he would go get
Yeah.
deployed somewhere in Afghanistan or whatever, and he would ship cases of the soup over there so that he could eat that and not the army food,
Yeah.
so that he could stay flying. And that was why the guys used to give him a hard time and call him Captain Soup.
Right.
And so that's
Yeah.
what when he came back, he started producing more of it and started making it commercially. And that's where the
Hmm.
whole business thing came from. So it's fascinating to hear about other people's talking about how, especially, that people that are struggling with gut issues, that that maybe they should look at doing something like that, like doing that 30-day soup challenge or whatever, and seeing how it
Yes.
could, I mean, it can't hurt, right? And it
Only
can,
help.
it only has the potential of helping. Um,
I tell people, humans eat a lot of different types of foods. We're very flexible with our regionally what humans can survive on. And so I say that like if you do a soup challenge and nothing happens, that means you're really healthy, right? Because that means you're resilient, your gut, like you shouldn't really see a lot of like big changes, maybe. But where people are at these days with their modern existence and lack of sunlight exposure and poor sleep and all the chemicals we're exposed to, and then lots of, long history of eating high carbohydrate that damages our gut microbiome even more. That when we do the soup diet, we get a lot of die off. And so the first week to 2 weeks can be very unsettling a little bit. And I would say definitely know about it, but don't let that deter you because moving through the symptoms are a cue from your body that it's trying to heal. And so we don't want to suppress those symptoms. We actually just want to move through them and create a container that's going to allow the body to use all that it needs so that it can get through that symptom. And I see this all the time, and it's just so exciting that people by the end of that soup challenge, they're, a little bit bored of soups, but they're like, I can't wait to keep, come back to this or try it again. And every year, my whole practice, we do like a community soup challenge together. So anybody can join and we all do it together. There's different levels of how to do this soup challenge. And so we do an easier version. But I know you had asked before too about like what are those foods that we want to like focus on or not eat. And I had mentioned the plant toxins, but I didn't really get into that. But I think this is also helpful just if someone's going to be doing the soup challenge, you might think, tomato soup or something like that, right? Non-starchy. It's non-starchy, right? Well, tomatoes, unfortunately, they're very high in oxalates and solamines. And these are plant toxins that are very stimulating to our immune system. And there's also lectins in the nightshade. It's a nightshade kind of vegetable, and all the nightshades have lectins. And these lectins are very sticky proteins that will damage the gut lining. So when I do a lot of gut healing with clients, we're going to want to limit, if not completely avoid for a short period of time, these lectin foods. And then when we look at ancestrally how people did eat these foods, they would ferment them. And fermentation is actually very good in getting rid of or reducing some of the lectin exposure. So that an example, gluten is a lectin and bread and wheat, I mean, but when you ferment the bread, it actually reduces the gluten in the bread. So the lectins are also in potatoes. There's the oxalate toxin that's in the tomato as well, and those are commonly in spinach, another great non-starchy vegetable, but has some problem. It can be problematic for many.
Right.
So, and I overate the oxalate foods, lots of beets, lots of beet greens in my vegan days, and spinach. And I actually was starting to chip my teeth more. Um, I could taste the chalkiness whenever I would eat it. That was the oxalates binding to the calcium and so that is something to look out for, those plant toxins as well.
So when if I was gonna do that, if I was gonna eat a bunch of soup, like something toward like the soup challenge or something, 30 days, I would be wanting to make a lot of meat type soups. Um,
Hmm.
when you make these soups or you get people to make these soups, is it just the fluid or does it still have um
Yeah.
some actual
Substance.
meat and stuff in it as well?
Yeah,
Um,
it's yes, great question. Because sometimes people will think I'm saying soup and they're just drinking broth. They're just
Broths,
drinking
right.
broth.
Yeah.
But no, this is a whole meal. You can do Yeah, definitely meat based. There's going to be animal protein in it. You can do shredded chicken, you can do fish, you can do pork, you can do lamb, ground meats, the stew meats are good in there. And when you make your meat stock, there's going to be meaty, meat that's from making the meat stock, especially if you do a whole chicken.
Hmm.
And then that is a great, that's the meat. That's a lot of the protein that you're going to put in. Oh, you could also do eggs too if you don't have any issues with that. Um, and then and then the non-starchy vegetables that I do like to have people encouraged to put in there these are some combinations that I think work really well. Ginger, broccoli, and onion and carrot, like those four. You can do bok choy and cauliflower and mushroom. Those are good ones. So you can do all kinds of different combinations. You can do beets, but just the ratios might be different for each person of what they like and what they enjoy. So yeah, there you can do an all vegetable soup, but you do also want to have like I like to do a blended rutabaga, leek, and garlic soup, and it's just all blended. And then I'll do on the side like a fried egg, or not just one, maybe multiple. You want to get a good amount of protein in at your meal, but there's good protein also in the stock. But that's how you could do that. So yeah.
Is it okay to add cream? Because I love creamy
Oh
soups,
yeah.
but so you could add some cream and make it like all creamy.
Yeah.
Okay.
A better option though for the gut is to ferment the cream and do soured cream. And then you can add the soured cream, even if it's like to lukewarm temperature of your soup, it's not going to kill the bacteria that much. It's okay. You
So
can have
do you
sour cream.
teach people to ferment it themselves, or do they go and buy sour cream from the store?
Oh, it's best to get your own homemade sour cream. So you want to get ideally the highest quality dairy, which is raw milk and A2. So that's either a raw goat's dairy or a A2 Jersey cows raw milk. And
Okay.
then you can get the raw cream from them, and also like just ferment that or culture that. I also teach my clients how to do the homemade yogurt and homemade kefir. They're so much more potent. When we go and buy dairy fermented at the store, it's still better because they're fermenting some of the lactose out, which is good. I don't ever really recommend a lot of people to drink plain milk. But the cream is higher in fat and so very low lactose typically.
Mm.
But the fact that you can sour it still and it gets really tangy is there's some good sugars in there that need to be,
So
broken down.
you teach people how to do this all on your website.
Yes, I have some YouTube videos and
Okay.
blogs on my website, and then definitely working with clients. It is something we talk about all the
Okay,
time.
this is amazing. I think just for a cleanse, I mean, I think
Yeah,
I might even try this.
good. Go.
So if we tell people how they can find you, the different places, and then we'll put it in the show notes as well. But
Mhm.
just to call it out now, your website,
Yes.
YouTube, all different places people can find stuff about you.
Awesome. Yeah. So my website's nutritionwithconfidence.com. And then I have my husband and he had his own healing issue or health issues and healing story of he had debilitating gastrointestinal symptoms. So this protocol is so good. If you have gastrointestinal symptoms, it's very good. It's very obvious that you have some gut issues, but some people will not have gut issues. They have normal stools and they still need to do, the soup reset. So, but nutritionwithconfidence.com. And then we have a podcast called Healing with Confidence Podcast. And that's our YouTube channel where you can find some of these tutorial videos. But definitely just go to the website. I'm on Instagram as well. And Facebook, a lot of the social medias. So, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
but they can get those handles all from off your website if they want.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, this was brilliant. And
Good.
yeah, I look forward to trying this. I think it's gonna I'm excited.
I I think if anyone can take one thing from today is just go home and make some soup. And if you make a batch of soup a week, that's a lot of maintenance gut healing that you're doing. But yeah, once a year you can join us. We can, you can do it any time of the year, but seasonally is a great time to do a soup challenge. So soup for
When
every
is your soup
meal.
challenge normally start? What sort of time
Usually
of year?
mid-October or October to November.
Okay.
So around that time, kind of going into it really centers you going into the holiday season. And then a lot of the time I continue it on throughout the whole holiday season and you know through January winter time. And then but yeah, those fermented foods like the fermented dairy are big. And then also some I wanted to mention a couple other fermented foods that are really therapeutic. Beet kvass. I have a recipe on how to make beet kvass. This is a really great liver tonic because as you're kind of shifting things in the gut, anytime anything dies, if you're killing some bad bacteria or anything like that, there's some toxins that are released and your body has to deal with that. So the fermented foods are think of them as like tonics, digestive enzymes even. So ferment even having like a beet kvass or sauerkraut or kimchi that's homemade or somewhere or farmers market made that it definitely has the live bacteria. Those are going to be just great to add into the soup challenge for you and anyone else
And you
listening.
think a month is a good amount of time?
Oh,
Uh,
definitely.
okay.
So technically, these little the microvilli, the cells, the intestinal cells, they kind of look like this.
Mm.
They're like the shag carpet. And when you have leaky gut, though, they look shriveled up like this. So each of these cells technically can regenerate in only 3 days. The problem is that we have so many other imbalances in our gut bacteria, and that ecosystem takes a long time to shift for people. So that's why the longer you do a low carb diet, the better. And sometimes there's certain symptoms that won't go away that quickly in like a month. That was like the case for me. And it was a long journey. And I'm still low carb because it still feels really good to my body. But the bacteria in our gut is sensitive to light. It's sensitive to our hormones, stress, the food we eat, medications that we're taking.
Mm.
That yeah, our thoughts. So like you said, there's so much we don't know yet. We only know 30% of the bacteria that are actually present in our gut. So there's a lot of the blueprints of like what the types of bacteria we are really needing that we're missing out on just because of modern living. When we clean a lot of with chemicals, like we're not outside as much in the dirt, we're not going to get all the diverse bacteria as well. But the food is a major culprit. And starting with the soups is I think the most lowest hanging fruit that we can
Oh.
do.
Oh, this has been amazing. Thank you so much
Good.
for your time and sharing this with us.
Yes, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay. You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.